Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra, where I give you all the juicy nuggets and information concerning the context of the war and details about the war and the ongoing fighting and geopolitical shenanigans around Ukraine and the wider region. Okay, let's start with IRIS-T. This is the much lauded German surface-to-air missile system that has apparently had a success rate of 9 out of 10 of the missiles it targets, cruise missiles, they have taken down with this system. There is at least one operational in and around Kyiv. We know that because fragments of the IRIS-T rockets have been found around Kyiv after taking out Russian ordnance, and now missiles. Now there are several more supposedly on the way, and the German company that makes these is working as hard and as fast as it can in order to create these systems. So this has been a real sort of boon for Ukraine, but obviously they need loads more of these. And speaking of such systems, we've got the NASAMS, which is to remind you, the Norwegian or National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System. There are at least 2 of these systems have been delivered to Ukraine, but both these systems have a range of more than 30 kilometers and have at least 8 launchers holding up to 48 AMRAAM missiles, according to US and Ukrainian officials. So when you say there are 2 systems in place, it doesn't mean there are just 2 single rocket launchers. That means there are a number of launchers and number of radar systems that work together, or as one overarching sort of umbrella system. And to have 2 of these systems is to actually give an awful lot more coverage and air defense than if you thought they were just two rocket launchers and maybe 2 radars. It's not that. But there is now call for more of these. Here, Raytheon, who makes them, say that Ukraine-bound NASAMS are in the US hands now. There's lots of talk about this, and in fact, here's an interview with someone on. I think this is CNBC. The CEO of Raytheon Technologies, Greg Hayes, admits they're blocked from sending the Patriot missile, but that's not to say that they aren't doing their
seems to be playing for
work with these particular missiles, the NASAMS systems. So the Patriot are the ones that lots of people are calling for Ukraine to have, and they're the ones that the US use themselves, and they have stationed around the White House and whatnot. Yeah, they are not being promised.
Little children, the kindergartens. Can you please explain to me why the White House seems to be playing for a tie and is unwilling to protect those targets, since the Patriot missile could do that?
Well, Jim, I think a couple of points there. The first of all, we did just deliver 2 NASAMS systems. So NASAMS is a National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System. We were delivered 2 of them to the government a couple of weeks ago. They're being installed in Ukraine today. It is a short-range air defense system, and it can fire everything from an AMRAAM to an AIM-120, and it can knock down everything in the sky, from drones to ballistic missiles to fighter jets. The more capable system is out there. It's called Patriot, to your point, and we have deployed those in over 18 countries around the world to provide everything from ballistic missile defense to defense against drones. Right now, the U.S. government has decided that we're going to only allow NASAMS into Ukraine and not Patriots, but something that we're talking to them about on a regular basis. But again, I think this is a decision that's going to have to be made at the White House, and it's all about making sure that we provide the Ukrainians what they need to defend themselves, and we're prepared to do that as quickly as the government allows us.
Which is to say that Raytheon would be happy to provide them, but it's obviously US government saying no. And there'll be these discussions going on all the time, such as with ATACMS. So these HIMARS systems, the high mobility rocket launch systems that can fire sort of up to 80 kilometers, but there are rockets that you could put into them that will fire 300 kilometers, but the US and allies won't provide them for fear of escalating the conflict and them being used to attack targets within Russia. So that's a discussion. I've argued for a long time that ATACMS should be deployed. It shouldn't be a problem. So there has been a lot of talk in America. So the Progressive Democrats, about 30 of them, signed a letter to say that America should be trying to get more involved in diplomacy This was actually written back in June. Right, and for some reason has only just come out now, and it's causing all sorts of upset, and lots of people saying, "God, these radical lefts just don't have a clue, and we don't want to be going through appeasement." Actually, it's worth noting the letter didn't really say that, so it's been taken way out of context. But the timing, I don't quite understand why the timing has come out now, because now you've had a bunch of these very same progressive Democrats saying they wouldn't sign that letter now. So this was June the 30th, they signed it, and we're now at the end of October. And they have no idea why the timing has come out now. They weren't criticizing Biden, but they were saying that support of Ukraine should continue. It needs to be understood in the full context. It's really easy to say, "Oh, this is just the left wing, like, being stupid and doing the wrong thing." I think this is best summed up by Dom Nichols for the right wing Telegraph yesterday, being pretty objective about this. So I'm going to play what he says.
Be cock-a-hoop at this.
Thanks, Francis. Dom Nichols.
Yeah, I got one comment about the letter from the Democratic caucus. I mean, I don't think this is a bad intervention. I urge everybody to go and read it. It's only a page and a bit long, so I could only do it in 5 breaths. It's quite easy. Go and search for it, because if you just read the comments about it, and I've seen comments saying it's a gift to Russia. I've seen other people say no, it's really hard on Russia and it's good for Ukraine. I mean, you can take from it whatever you like. I think you need to go and read the original text, and please, I do urge you to do that. It does make the point that Ukraine has to prevail, and that this illegal and disgusting war is the fault of Putin. It goes on to it basically raises the idea that how is this war going to end? And I've said before, most wars, well, all wars end, and most wars end by negotiation. So, I have offered an opinion that this might be one of those wars that bucks the trend, and there's a military defeat, an outright victor on the battlefield. But you've got to consider all alternatives. And I think this letter is helpful in raising the level of conversation. Russia will, as Francis says, Russia will take from this. The Kremlin will parrot this as, there's cracks in the alliance. They're calling for Ukraine to negotiate and la 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 la. That's not what the letter says. The letter basically says to ask Biden to set out what's going on here. How does he see it ending? I spoke to Patrick Porter, Professor of International Security at University of Birmingham. Pat Porter 76, I think he is on Twitter. Really good guy to follow. And he was making the point that if the external supporters, I hesitate to use the West because there's lots of people not in the West who support Ukraine and want to see Russia defeated here. But if we're not prepared to physically get on the ground and fight, then where is the limit? If the limit is just to arm and fund Ukraine, okay, that might be a coherent policy position. But you've got to state that. We need our political leaders to state that, because an open-ended war with an open-ended checkbook, I mean, it just doesn't work like that. It's not the case that Ukraine is simply able to set the war aims here, and the external supporters then just keep sort of stumping up, because we have got skin in the game. We're not actively on the battlefield bleeding. I totally accept that. However, we do have skin in the game here, because there is a chance at the back end of this that there could be a nuclear escalation, and we're obviously involved in that. So we have legitimate policy aims, legitimate national and international aims here. Now, at the moment, those are being exercised through support for Ukraine, but
good old adverts. So this is where it's also worth saying, and I think he goes on to say this in a second, that wars don't ever get finished without diplomacy. There's always diplomacy at the end of these events. And so, we can't shy away from the fact that there will have to be some kind of diplomatic interaction between Russia and the rest of the world, Russia and Ukraine.
It's call for a more coherent discussion about what this end might look like. And the idea, Pat Porter says, so the idea of just using the word negotiation means that you're some sort of appeasement, Moscow friendly, Putiniska. I mean, it's not that. Life is never that simple. It's not one or the other. He says, this is a quote from Patrick, I'm going to be writing about for tomorrow. Anyone referring to negotiations is dismissed as fringe or isolationist. It suits the Hawks to paint anyone not supporting their position as Neville Chamberlain. And if you know Patrick Porter, you can hear him saying, Neville Chamberlain. I mean, he's a great guy. But, what he's saying is that there's got to be some middle ground. And just talking about what might negotiations look like does not mean that you are saying, Ukraine, you've got to give up. We're all sick and tired of this. It's a long, cold winter. But there's got to be room for discussion and debate to see what the rational end state of this might be. Because as I said, we're all involved here.
Well, Colin,
So there you go. I think that's a really sensible line to take on this. Again, read the letter. It's not calling for like rolling over and letting Russia have what they want. It's saying we need to wholeheartedly support Ukraine, but where does this end, and what does negotiation look like? And I think that's absolutely sensible. No, all conflicts end in some kind of diplomatic agreement. And okay, it's unlikely that Russia's ever going to admit that they have got this wrong and that they've lost and will go away with their tail between their legs. So therefore, what does the end look like, and how do you best negotiate an end to this, whilst also providing Ukraine with everything they need? Because what you want to do is provide everything that Ukraine needs, such that Russia realise that they really can't win. And therefore, diplomacy and negotiation is the only way. But that the upper hand is with Ukraine. It's not so. Asking for diplomacy right at the beginning, when Russia were in the ascendancy in this conflict, if that ever was particularly the case, then obviously the hand is in Russia's favour. Whereas now things are different, and it's looking like things are in Ukraine's favour. So they have a much more stronger bargaining position. But it's understanding all of this and not just saying, oh, it's war, and that's it. That's the only way to end this, is just outright war, because it's not so simple as that. Life is just a little bit more nuanced. However, here is a little discussion, something to think about. If you think I'm overacting to all these calls to just diplomacy harder, a quick thread on why it's so damaging at the moment. So this is a little bit of a flip side there. So at the moment, the war is going badly for Putin. The cost is absolutely ruinous for the Russian economy, its military, and having to make extremely unpopular decisions like mobilization. This has not gone unnoticed inside Russia, especially within the elites, who are fully aware it's not going well and who notice that Putin took them in this direction. He did this, and ultimately he needs to justify that he and only he can turn it around. Importantly, the cost is so high that Putin would eventually need to show what it was all for. If Ukraine were to stop and leave his current gains uncontested, he cannot accept it at these lines. He needs to demonstrate that these enormous costs incurred so far are worth it. To do this, he is relying on three core narrative pillars, which you see repeated again and again. The first is that the war is not with Ukraine, it's with the West, and the West will ultimately get bored or cold and stop supporting Ukraine, enabling Russia to overrun the Ukrainian forces. The second strand is that mobilization and other rearmament strategies will substantially reinforce Russian capacity in the medium term, and that any short-term losses are therefore temporary. The third narrative strand is an assertion that nobody can replace him personally and undo the change. For example, that's what annexations do. It's a domestic argument that nobody can replace him and retreat by imposing legal technical challenges on any would-be successor. Note the effect of these three pillars and the conclusion they lead Russian elites to. Putin is irreplaceable, and failures in the short term are unfortunate but inconsequential, because in the medium term Russia will rearm and the West will get bored, poor, cold, scared, and abandon Ukraine. In order for hostilities to cease, then basically there's functionally two endings. The first is that Russia beats Ukraine to a Ukrainian surrender at the extent of what Putin needs to justify the war's cost internally. That's going to be a lot of additional occupied territory. The other possibility is that Putin's internal narratives fail and he's forced by the elites, or removed by them, and his successor is forced to negotiate with Ukraine for some kind of long-term settlement. But key here is that these three narratives, two are uncontrollable externally. Nobody external has any meaningful control over them, and nobody external will persuade Russian elites that someone other other than Putin can manage a war or a retreat better. And the extent to which Russian forces are able to regroup and rearm is something that will be proved or disproved on the battlefield. But critically here, it will be proved or disproved many, many months from now. But the third pillar is that the West will get bored or tired or cold or poor or scared and will back off in the short to medium term, enabling Russia to use its regrouped and rearmed force to take territory up to whatever revenge lines Putin needs to justify his enormous costs. That's why these type of diplomacy harder letters are so unhelpful. They don't actually change anything in the West, but they are heard and amplified loudly by the Kremlin internally to justify the narrative the West is going to back off soon, and when they do, we will win. That's why Russian state media was obsessed with Elon Musk for days. That's why Russia's public diplomacy is obsessively focused on deflating Western support, creating fake food stations in EU to help Europeans survive the winter for domestic purposes, for that narrative to survive. The war continues until those narratives break on cold reality. These types of diplomacy harder statements sustain the belief that the West is going to abandon Ukraine, and that in the interim that Putin is right to continue his war, and ignoring short-term losses will pay off. So really, this is the two different elements at play here, which is we need to do diplomacy at some point. Let's not give up trying to do that. And then on the other hand, saying, well, actually, to some extent, that plays into a Russian narrative that we're all kind of giving up in the West, and that all Russia need to do is wait it out, and there's no one else that can do it other than Putin. So I understand that these things are complicated, but I think we first and foremost we need to be providing Ukraine with everything they need in order to win the military contest, whilst also behind the scenes committing ourselves to do as much as we can diplomatically, and it's about forcing Putin's hand or Russia's hand diplomatically with the contest on the battlefield. So perhaps it's not an either or, but a both and. But it's how you do the diplomacy in such a way that it doesn't, give the Russian narrative sort of wind in its sails. Anyway, lots for you to talk about, no doubt. Let's get on to looking at this is just an example of life in a war zone. This is driving down a road that is being actively shelled. And of course, they're just, playing music in the car. I don't want to get like copyright infringements there, but you've got explosions going right on the road, next to the road, just driving down the road without moving, without swerving, just keep on driving straight. It kind of reminds me when I was backpacking in Australia in 1996 and driving down with a 1976 Toyota Land Cruiser down the road, and it's like you have kangaroos, especially at night, sort of jumping across the road, and the idea is don't swerve. If you swerve, you'll actually end up crashing and doing yourself damage. Just keep going straight, and if you hit a kangaroo, you hit a kangaroo. Don't try and swerve out the way of a kangaroo. That's why you got rhubars. Just go straight. And it kind of reminds me of that anyway. A little bit of an aside there. I showed you a video the other day of a helicopter flying down a highway, and I said, what is it doing? And of course lots of people correctly said, well, it's actually doing that for a really good reason, because it stays out of radar here, and as long as you miss anything that's going over the road, like telegraph poles, electricity lines or signs and whatnot, then this is a good way of staying under the radar and being flying sensibly. So here is possibly that same example, or possibly not, because there are two here, just from a different point of view. This is from the pilot's point of view. So here we have helicopters flying above the highway, the motorway, and two of them keeping really close to the road. Interesting how much stuff there is on these major roads. This is all still close to, or has been close to, a front line somewhere. And yeah, the helicopters obviously doing this for good tactical reasons, for good, it's a way of keeping themselves safe and out of sight of radar, as low to the ground as possible. But the good thing about highways is that there aren't trees and stuff around, and you can easily see things like pylons that go across from a distance. So that's why they're coming up here, and then they can duck back down afterwards. But there you go. So I thought that was quite interesting to see, and people are absolutely right to call me out, saying that there's good reason, they're not just having a laugh. Here's a little bit of footage from Sky News, who are on the front line, and this is around Bakhmut, I think, with a drone team.
A good view of the battlefield for this DIY team, who do things in an unconventional way. Dan took an online course to learn how to fly, while the drones were donated by volunteers, and his girlfriend pays the subscription for their internet link. The Russians are...
So it goes to show how much stuff is provided not by central government, by people helping out, by volunteers, by volunteer groups, by girlfriends, by etc. etc. This is just such a community project, the whole war. And you could say the same with the Russians, not having to buy their own equipment themselves, but I guess that's slightly different to a degree. Or it just shows that how desperate the Russians are, that they literally are buying their own stuff. There's not other people buying it for them voluntarily, although there are elements of that in Russia as well.
More stuffy than us, he says.
The main difference, as far as I can see, that we are more flexible and more of a horizontal basis, and especially if we came from civilian lives with a lot of experience, so our commander cannot say that he is, I don't know, he's smarter than us.
They conduct their mission under...
That's fascinating. So I talked about that, about the vertical versus horizontal, the fact that you got NCO, NATO training for these Ukrainian soldiers and units, such that they can be much more reactive and make decisions further down the chain of command, whereas Russia do it as very centralized and very sort of hierarchical, and the stuff happening at the top. And this guy here is saying, yeah, we're more flexible. Basically, we can, and if our commander says something, actually we're from civilian life and we know about, for example, these drones, is like, we can say no, that's not right, and he's able to challenge him, which is quite an interesting way of understanding.
The trees, using the internet to live stream information to their commander. If they spot enemy activity, their superior calls in a strike.
This is modern warfare. The drones are cheap, they're compact. These guys don't need much equipment, but they can be deadly, and the Ukrainians know how to use them.
In this footage, the team spot 3 Russian soldiers in the center of the screen. Here, strikes are called in, the unit monitoring their effectiveness from above. During our visit, the battlefield was relatively quiet.
We just saw that the general picture, that no infantry is coming. So
okay, that's what you were checking for Russian troops.
Their off-the-shelf tech now works with traditional kit, like these 50-ton howitzers made in Poland.
So these are the AHS Crabs. These are Polish long-range pieces of artillery, or pieces of long-range artillery, and they are really useful. Now, quite a lot of these have been. So you hear a lot about Caesar, about Panzer Howitzer 2000, but more of these have been provided, and these are Polish. I think they're made with South Korea as well, or I believe pieces of kit that have been really, really useful.
It's called a Crab, and the Ukrainian commander says he's lucky to have one.
All the information in here, it's all written in Polish. Okay.
We're managing. We don't care if it's in Polish, German or English. We'll manage.
Like their colleagues with drones, this unit lives under the trees. They emerge when they're provided with new coordinates. And we saw it fire twice, using shells designed to kill enemy troops. The DIY drone units help to improve their accuracy. And that helps the tank commanders to conserve their shells. But the Russians also use drones.
Are you safe in the trees?
At least for now, but not always. Sometimes cluster bombs land here. And they even drop phosphorus over there.
The Ukrainian...
So there you go. That's just an interesting insight. And talking about, precision, or that's precision, but they are often walking shells in with the use of drone. Well, here, and I keep mentioning stuff like this, here's another example of a munition that is used against a piece of artillery. I think, yeah, it's a Malka self-propelled gun of the Russians that Ukrainians hit. Now, this is almost certainly with a precision munition, which means something like an Excalibur shell that has its own sort of guided system. And you know that because it only takes one hit to take this out. They're not being walked in. You saw that piece of footage before with the drones. There's like 2, 3, 4 explosions to take out something there. Here you've just got, there's no other pock marks, there's no other holes. It's just one shot, takes it out. Okay, that's almost certainly an Excalibur or something similar to that, because the accuracy is just one hit only, and they are expensive, these shells, to use, of course, to buy, to get hold of. There's lots of other things I want to say, but I've sort of run out of time for talking too much, and I'll leave this one for tomorrow, which is a thread on winter, which I think is really important to go through. Just to let you know that gas prices have natural gas in Europe just turned negative today after its highest price only a few months ago. Incredible job of replenishing the inventory. They did not mess around. So it turns out that the European levels of gas are virtually at full capacity across the board, which is absolutely incredible given that everyone was relying on Russian gas and they kept turning it off and they were being held to ransom. Well, this is just a really fantastic reaction from Europe to fill their reserves to almost capacity already, and winter hasn't even yet begun to set in. So really great news. And I heard some stuff on the Ukraine the latest podcast yesterday about how some German companies who at the beginning of the war were saying we're going to be screwed, this war is going to do us in because we use so much gas, etc., etc. And the CEO who was saying that, and just all doom and gloom, has now just announced that their particular huge sort of manufacturing company uses massive energy, has cut their gas usage by 50%, which is like phenomenal. And they were saying that the gas usage of these companies is almost like the equivalent to some small countries elsewhere. Like, it's just the phenomenal manufacturing taking place in certain areas of Germany, and to have cut that usage, it just goes to show that where there's a will, there's a way, and necessity is the mother of all invention. So yeah, very interesting. And just the last bit, because I won't do the winter stuff, but so foreign policy, Russia's reportedly recruiting Afghan commandos to fight in Ukraine. Multiple Afghan military and security sources told Foreign Policy that members of Afghanistan's National Army Commando Corps say they are being contacted with offers to join the Russian military. Before the US ceded Afghanistan to the Taliban in August 2021, and that was all a little bit disastrous, wasn't it? The US spent almost $90 billion building the Afghan national defense and security forces. The commandos had been trained by the US Navy SEALs and the British SAS. After the US withdrawal, between 20 and 30,000 volunteer commandos were left behind. A former Afghan commando officer told Foreign Policy he is certain that Russia's mercenary Wagner group is behind Russia's recruitment of Afghanistan special forces. So there you go. Just something else to add into the mix. But yes, thanks for checking this out. I will take you through another run through of stuff about this war tomorrow in tomorrow's Ukraine War Update Extra, and I will talk about winter and the things to consider with regard to winter and how it might affect Russia and Ukraine. Anyway, thanks so much for your support. Please like, subscribe, share. If you want there, you can buy me a coffee down in details in the description below. There's PayPal, there's YouTube thanks, there's all that kind of stuff. So thanks if you are able to do that. And if you want to buy some stash, you can hop along to uasupporter.com/ATP. And there are loads of things that you can buy to show your support for Ukraine. Earphone, AirPod cases. You know, it's amazing what you can get, or drinkware. Get yourself a mug. Everyone loves a mug. You can have a Ukraine mug there, showing your support for Ukraine, whilst also drinking tea or coffee. Other drinks are available. Anyway, thank you so much. You take care. Toodle pips.